All right, so have you ever wondered how Rome, like went from a small town to a massive empire? Like, seriously, how did they pull that off?
Well, you're not alone. It's a question that's fascinated historians for, well, centuries.
Yeah, exactly. And we're diving into it today. We've got all sorts of sources here to help us unpack this story, like ancient texts, archaeological findings, even some of those crazy Roman
Right,
myths.
those myths are wild.
I know. Get this, we'll be talking about like battling Hannibal's elephants, the whole Romulus and Remus drama, and even the surprising ways Roman family life, might not be that different from our own.
Yeah, you might be surprised how much resonates even today. And what's really fascinating is that Rome's rise to power wasn't this, like, overnight thing.
Oh,
It
really?
was a gradual process, a real slow burn. It
Yeah.
took centuries of strategy, military might, and, some pretty clever political maneuvering.
Okay, so let's rewind way back to the beginning, around 753 BC. What was early Rome like? Like, paint us a picture.
So imagine a small settlement nestled along the Tiber River in Italy. This location was strategic, like perfect for trade and travel. Think bustling commerce, boats laden with goods, all sorts of connections to the wider world. And even the very founding of Rome, well, it's shrouded in myth and legend.
Oh, yeah, the whole Romulus and Remus thing, right? The twins raised by a she-wolf.
Exactly. It's a tale that really captures the imagination. It speaks to how the Romans themselves were fascinated by their origins. Whether truth or legend, these stories highlight this idea of Rome being destined for greatness. It's a narrative they cultivated from the very start.
So they were already thinking big, even back then. But they weren't content with just staying in their little village, right?
Not at all. Early Rome was already showing signs of a complex society. They had a Senate for leadership and assemblies where citizens could vote, but their ambitions went way beyond their borders. They started expanding their influence through a combination of strategic treaties and, of course, military might.
Which brings us to the legendary Roman army. The legions, the conquests, all that epic warfare, what made them such a dominant force?
The Roman army wasn't just big. It was incredibly disciplined and organized. Imagine signing up for a 25-year service commitment.
Whoa, 25 years. That's like longer than some modern careers.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Talk about dedication.
So what kind of training and tactics made them so formidable? Like, how did they win so consistently?
Their training was brutal, designed to weed out the weak and create these hardened soldiers. They mastered formations like the testudo, where they'd lock shields together, creating this near impenetrable moving fortress.
A moving fortress. That sounds intense.
It was. It allowed them to advance on enemies while being shielded from, like, arrows and stuff. It was a tactic they used effectively against various foes.
Okay, that's pretty ingenious, but I'm guessing being a Roman soldier wasn't all glory and triumph, right? There had to be some downsides.
Definitely. It was a dangerous life, constant battles, harsh conditions, and the threat of death was always there. But there's also the allure of, well, potential riches. Looting was common, and soldiers got their share of the spoils of war.
So, high risk, high reward. If you survived, you could come home pretty wealthy.
Exactly. And maybe even retire early to a life of leisure. No wonder they were so motivated.
So, how did this army actually help Rome expand its empire? Was it just brute force, or was there a strategy to their expansion?
It was definitely strategic. Think of it like a cycle. They'd conquer nearby areas in Italy, incorporate those territories and their resources into the growing empire. Conquered people would pay taxes and often provide soldiers, which fueled further expansion.
Okay, so they were using the resources from conquered areas to fund more conquests.
Yeah, it was a pretty effective system. Fueled by military success and that strategic control of resources, Rome just kept growing.
It's like a snowball effect. And
Mhm.
one of those early conquests involved Hannibal, right? The guy who crossed the Alps with war elephants.
He did. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with war elephants is still, like, mind-blowing, logistically speaking. It shows his determination, but also Roman resilience. Those battles against Hannibal were some of Rome's toughest, and they really showcased their ability to adapt and overcome even the most unexpected tactics.
War elephants. Yeah, I bet that was unexpected. They clearly weren't easily deterred, so they're conquering territories, their army's legendary, they're getting wealthy. It's starting to sound like an empire, not just a small town. But how are they governing all this new territory? Was it just one king calling the shots?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The Romans weren't interested in, like, replicating those monarchies they saw around them. Around 509 BC, they decided they'd had enough of kings and established a republic.
A republic, so more like a government by the people. How did that actually work?
The Roman Republic was this complex system designed to, prevent any one person or group from having too much power.
Right.
They had the Senate, a group of elder statesmen who proposed laws and advised leaders.
Okay, like a council of elders.
Yeah, something like that. But it wasn't just the elite running the show. They also had assemblies where citizens could vote on various matters. So they had a direct voice in their government.
So they were already experimenting with ideas of representation and like checks and balances. Those are still like fundamental to many governments today.
Right. It's pretty forward thinking for the time.
What about the laws themselves? Was it just a bunch of unwritten rules and traditions?
They actually had one of the earliest examples of written law, the 12 tables.
Yeah.
These were displayed publicly so everyone knew what the rules were.
Interesting. So it was all about transparency and fairness.
Yeah, it helped to create a level playing field, at least to some degree.
But not everyone had equal rights in Roman society, right?
That's true. Roman society had different tiers of citizenship, and not everyone had equal access to power or resources. But it is important to note that over time, the rights of citizenship expanded to include more people.
So there was some social mobility?
Yeah, definitely. It reflects a gradual shift in their social and political landscape.
Okay, so we've talked about the military, the government, the laws. But what about the rest of Roman life? Was it all just war and politics?
Not at all. The Romans had a vibrant culture. They loved art, literature, and especially architecture.
Yeah.
And their buildings, they were impressive, not just functional, but like statements of Roman power and ingenuity.
Oh, yeah, like the Colosseum. It's an iconic symbol of Roman entertainment, but also a testament to their architectural skills. What other structures did they build that were, like, mind-blowing?
Well, the Pantheon, with its huge dome, is another marvel of Roman engineering. These structures weren't just about showcasing their wealth, they were about, like, pushing boundaries and leaving a lasting legacy.
Okay, so they had style, they had innovation, they were definitely making their mark on the world. But I imagine Roman society was more than just these grand buildings. What was daily life like for the average person?
Well, as with any society, daily life really depended on your social standing. You had the patricians, the wealthy elite, who lived a life of luxury. Then you had the plebeians, the common people, who lived much more modest lives.
And then there's the darker side of Roman society, slavery.
Sadly, yes. Slavery was a deeply ingrained part of the Roman world. It's a reminder that even in a society as advanced as Rome, there were still huge inequalities.
It's important to remember that, to see the full picture. What about family life? Was that important to Romans?
Family was super important. It was a cornerstone of their lives, though it wasn't static. Over time, a new type of marriage emerged, offering women more independence and property rights. It was a contrast to the traditional patriarchal roles from earlier periods.
So some signs of progress there. What else can you tell us about family life?
Well, in wealthy households, slaves often played important roles, even in childcare and education. It gives us a glimpse into the complexities of their social structure.
Yeah, power and privilege were definitely intertwined with everyday life. Now, we can't talk about Rome without mentioning their gods. What role did religion play in their lives?
Religion was everywhere. Their pantheon of gods, like Jupiter and Mars, were believed to influence everything. They built temples, held festivals, and were constantly trying to please the gods with rituals and offerings.
It seems like religion provided a framework for understanding the world. Okay, so we've covered their beginnings: military, government, culture, religion. It's a lot. But even mighty empires can fall, right?
Unfortunately, you're right. Rome's fall is a reminder that no civilization, no matter how powerful, is immune to decline. And understanding why they fell can offer some valuable lessons for us today.
Okay, so let's get into that. What were the factors that led to their decline? Was it one big event or a more gradual process?
It was definitely more complex than just one event. It was a perfect storm of internal and external pressures that ultimately brought them down. A real slow burn, unfolding over centuries.
So not a sudden collapse, but a gradual decline.
Exactly. And one of the key factors was this growing economic inequality. As the empire expanded, wealth became concentrated in the hands of the elite, while the poor struggled.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's a story that repeats itself throughout history. This disparity created a lot of social unrest and resentment, which weakened the fabric of Roman society.
A divided society is a vulnerable society. And were there also political problems brewing?
Oh, absolutely. Over time, the Roman government, which was once so efficient and fair, became increasingly corrupt and dysfunctional. Power struggles, assassinations, a decline in civic virtue. It was a mess.
So the very systems meant to provide stability were crumbling from within.
Exactly. It's like a house divided against itself. And on top of all that, they were facing some serious threats from outside the empire.
Oh, right. You mentioned external pressures. What kind of threats were they facing?
Well, Rome had always had to deal with challenges from beyond its borders. But as their internal problems grew, they became more vulnerable to these external threats. Barbarian tribes started to put more and more pressure on the empire's frontiers.
We always hear about these barbarian groups. Who were they exactly?
Well, the term barbarian is actually a Roman term, and it's a bit misleading. They used it to describe anyone who wasn't Roman, which is a pretty biased view, right?
Yeah, very Roman-centric.
Right. And these groups, they weren't uncivilized. They had their own complex societies, cultures, and motivations.
Okay, so it was more nuanced than just these savage hordes attacking Rome.
Exactly. So some were driven by like environmental pressures, things like climate change or overgrazing. That forced them to look for new lands and resources. Others were fleeing conflict or persecution, hoping for refuge or a better life. And some saw Rome's weakness as an opportunity for conquest.
So a mix of desperation, ambition, and opportunism.
Exactly. A real recipe for conflict.
Were there any specific groups that played a major role in the fall of the Western Roman Empire?
Well, there are a few that really stand out. The Goths, for example, they originated in Scandinavia and slowly migrated south, putting pressure on Rome's northern borders. They were a serious force, and their victory at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD was a major turning point.
Wasn't that the battle where the Roman Emperor Valens was killed?
It was. His death and that defeat, it sent shockwaves through the empire. It was like the aura of Roman invincibility was shattered.
I bet. So how did the Romans respond to this growing crisis?
Well, there were attempts to restore order,
Yeah.
strengthen defenses, things like that. But these efforts were always running up against internal divisions, a lack of resources, and just the sheer scale of the problems.
So even with those efforts, they were struggling to hold it all
It
together.
was like trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. Were there any figures who tried to, hold the empire together during this time? There were a few. Some recognized how serious the situation was and tried to reform things or bolster defenses. One was Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 AD. He saw that the empire had gotten too big to manage effectively, so he divided it in two.
He split the empire.
Yep. The Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire.
A pretty drastic move. Did it work?
Well, it bought them some time, but it couldn't fix the underlying problems. Another key figure was Constantine the Great. He became emperor in 306 AD. He's known for converting to Christianity, which obviously had a huge impact, but he also made some big political and administrative changes.
I've heard about Constantine moving the capital from Rome to Constantinople. Was that part of his strategy?
Absolutely. He saw how important the eastern provinces were and set up a new capital in Byzantium, a city perfectly situated on the Bosphorus Strait. It shifted the empire's center of power eastward and helped the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, as it became known, to survive for much longer.
Interesting. So while the West was struggling, the East was finding ways to adapt and survive.
Yeah, it's fascinating how different parts of the empire dealt with these challenges in different ways. What about the Vandals? They caused some serious trouble in the West, didn't they?
Oh yeah, the Vandals. They were originally from what's now Poland, and they migrated across Europe, eventually setting up a kingdom in North Africa. And they were fierce warriors, known for their ruthlessness. Their sack of Rome in 455 AD solidified the image of the empire in decline.
It's funny how their name is now a synonym for destruction, given their role in all this.
Right. It's a little ironic, but it shows how groups on the fringes of power can have a huge impact on history. The Vandals, along with the Goths, the Huns, and others, they all contributed to the events that brought down the Western Roman Empire.
It sounds like the final centuries of the Western Roman Empire were pure chaos.
Mm.
With all these problems, internal and external, was there any chance of saving it? By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was just a shadow of its former self. Their armies were depleted, they were out of money, and the leadership was weak. That sack of Rome in 410 AD by the Goths, that was devastating. And then the Vandals sacked it again in 455. It just showed how vulnerable they were.
So the end was inevitable. Was there one specific event that marked the fall of the Western Roman Empire?
In 476 AD, a barbarian general named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. That's usually considered the official date for the fall of the Western Roman Empire.
Okay, so 476 AD, the end of an era. But it wasn't just that one event, right? It sounds like it was a long process of decline.
Exactly. The empire didn't just vanish overnight. It was a gradual disintegration, a slow unraveling of power and authority.
It's amazing how, even in its decline, the Roman Empire's story is full of complexity. It's a reminder that history is rarely simple. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what about the legacy of this once mighty empire?
That's a great question. And that brings us to our next topic, the enduring impact of Rome on Western civilization. Even though the empire itself is long gone, its influence is still felt today.
Okay, so stay tuned for part two, where we'll explore how Rome's legacy lives on. We'll be right back.
Yeah, Rome's legacy, it's a big one. I mean, it's incredible how much of what we think of as, Western civilization has roots in ancient Rome.
Right, like it's everywhere. But where do we see it most clearly? Give us some examples.
Well, let's start with language. Latin, the language of ancient Rome, it's not really spoken anymore, at least not conversationally.
Yeah, not too many people are like ordering pizza in Latin these days.
Uh-huh, right. But its influence is huge. I mean, think about the Romance languages.
Romance languages?
Yeah, like French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. They all evolved directly from Latin.
Wow, so those verb conjugations that make language learning such a pain, we can blame the Romans for that.
Uh-huh, partially, yeah. And even English, which has, Germanic roots, it's been heavily influenced by Latin, especially in its vocabulary. Words like republic, senate, justice, legal, architecture, aqueduct, they all come from Latin. We're speaking a little bit of Roman every day.
It's like a linguistic time capsule. It's pretty cool when you think about it. And we touched on Roman law earlier. Wasn't that pretty influential too?
Oh yeah, hugely influential. Roman law was really sophisticated for its time, and it's had a huge impact on legal systems all over the world.
What kind of impact? Could you give us some specifics?
Well, think about concepts like precedent, the idea that past legal decisions should guide future rulings. That's a Roman legal principle. The presumption of innocence until proven guilty, the right to a fair trial, all these fundamental legal concepts have roots in Roman law.
It's amazing how those ideas have stood the test of time.
It is. Their legal system, it was designed to be fair and just, well, at least for its time. They wrestled with these big questions about justice, fairness, and the rights of individuals in society. It wasn't perfect, but it laid the groundwork for so much that came after.
And of course, we can't forget Roman architecture. Those buildings are still incredibly impressive.
The Colosseum, the Pantheon, the aqueducts, they've survived so much wars, disasters, centuries of wear and tear. They really show us Roman engineering at its best.
Yeah, it's one thing to read about them, but to actually see them in person, it's awe-inspiring. So how did their building skills influence later periods?
Well, the Romans made a lot of innovations, like in concrete and their use of arches and domes. It revolutionized building techniques. Their influence can be seen in buildings all over the world, government buildings, churches, bridges, even modern sports stadiums.
Wow, so their architectural legacy is all around us. What about their political ideas? Did the Romans have any lasting impact on how we think about government and power?
Definitely. I mean, the Roman Republic, with its emphasis on checks and balances, representative government, and the rule of law, it's been a model for so many political systems throughout history.
So those debates and power struggles we talked about earlier, they weren't just ancient history.
Not at all. They were shaping ideas about democracy and governance that are still relevant today. The Roman Republic, it wasn't a perfect democracy, but they experimented with different forms of government, and their focus on civic virtue has had a lasting impact.
It really makes you think. Even civilizations from thousands of years ago can still offer us valuable insights. So we've seen how Roman influences are all around us, in our languages, our buildings, the ways we structure our societies. It's clear that Rome wasn't built in a day, and its legacy is still being built upon, reinterpreted, centuries after its fall.
That's a great point. Their story isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the power of human ingenuity, creativity, and that ability to leave a mark on the world.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Roman Empire, it makes you wonder, what would those ancient Romans think if they could see our world today?
It's a fascinating question. Would they recognize the echoes of their civilization in our modern world? It's definitely something to think about as we say farewell to this incredible empire.
Well said. We'll leave our listeners with that thought-provoking question. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
It's amazing, isn't it, how this empire that fell so long ago still has such a hold on us today?
It really is. And it's not just about the ruins or the artifacts, right? It's about ideas, about ways of thinking that have survived for centuries.
Exactly. Rome's legacy, it's like this blueprint that's been built upon and adapted over time. And you can see it in so many different areas, like we were just talking about. Language, law, architecture, politics.
Right. Okay, so let's break it down a bit more. Where do we see these Roman fingerprints most clearly in our modern world?
Well, let's start with language. Latin, the language of ancient Rome. We don't really speak it conversationally anymore.
No, no more togas and gladiatorial combat in Latin, I guess.
Uh-huh, exactly. But its influence is huge. I mean, think about all the languages that descended from Latin.
Like Italian.
Yeah, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, all those Romance languages, they all have their roots in Latin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those verb conjugations that give language learners headaches, you can partially thank the Romans for that.
Haha, I'll keep that in mind next time I'm struggling with my Italian homework.
And even English, which, has Germanic roots, it's absorbed a ton of Latin vocabulary. Words like republic, senate, justice, legal, architecture, aqueduct, they all come from Latin. So even in our everyday conversations, we're speaking a little bit of Roman.
It really is like a linguistic time capsule. It
Yeah.
connects us to this ancient world in a way that's, well, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We also talked about how influential Roman law was.
Oh yeah, super influential. Roman law was really sophisticated for its time, and it's had a huge impact on legal systems all over the world. I mean, think about things like the concept of precedent, the idea that past legal decisions should guide future rulings. That comes from Roman law.
So basically, judges looking back at old cases to figure out how to rule on new ones.
Exactly. And the presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty, the right to a fair trial, those are all Roman legal principles. Their legal system was designed to be fair, to ensure justice for everyone. At least that was the goal.
Hmm.
Of course, no system is perfect, but those Roman legal principles, they laid the foundation for many modern legal systems. It's a
Yeah.
pretty remarkable legacy.
It is. And it's not just their ideas about law that have endured. Their architecture is still incredibly impressive, even after all these centuries.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, have you ever stood in the shadow of the Colosseum?
I have. It's amazing. You can almost feel the energy of the gladiatorial combat, the roar of the crowd.
Exactly. And the Pantheon, those aqueducts, these structures, they've survived wars, natural disasters, centuries of neglect. They're a testament to the skill of Roman engineers.
Yeah, they really knew what they were doing. So how did those Roman architectural innovations influence later periods? Did those techniques and styles stick around?
Oh yeah, for sure. Their innovations in concrete, the way they used arches and domes, it completely changed how people built things. You can see their influence in countless buildings all over the world. Government buildings, churches, bridges, even modern sports stadiums.
It's like their architectural DNA is woven into the fabric of our cities.
Okay, so we see Roman influence in our languages, our laws, our buildings. It's everywhere. What about their political ideas? Did the Romans have any lasting impact on how we think about government and power today?
Definitely. The Roman Republic, with its emphasis on checks and balances, separating powers, having representative government, the rule of law, all that, it's been a model for so many political systems throughout history. So those debates and power struggles we talked about, they weren't just ancient Roman drama. They actually helped shape how we think about democracy.
Exactly. The Roman Republic, it wasn't a perfect democracy, not by a long shot. But those experiments they conducted with different forms of government and that emphasis they put on civic virtue, all of that had a huge impact on political thought.
It really shows how even civilizations that existed thousands of years ago can still offer us valuable insights. Okay, so we've seen how Roman influences are woven into so many aspects of our modern world, in our languages, our buildings, our legal systems, our ideas about government. Rome might be gone, but its legacy is very much alive.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most important things we can take away from studying the Roman Empire. It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles and dead emperors. It's about understanding the enduring power of human ingenuity, creativity, and, well, that ability we have to leave a mark on the world.
Mm.
And Rome definitely left its mark.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the Roman Empire. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those history gears turning.